Well, good morning and welcome here on Wednesday, the 28th of May, for the launch of the Smart Centers Index number 11. I'm Michael Mainelli, Chairman of Zien Group, and with me here to present the results today is Mike Wardle, CEO. It's been a very, very interesting period in geopolitics, as I think many of us have observed. Some of this is starting to turn up in SCI 11 today. Now, the format of today is one familiar to FS Club members. My job is to get out of the way as quickly as possible so you can get to the meat of the matter with Mike. Mike will be speaking for approximately 10 to 15 minutes, and I will then jump in with a few observations of my own. You can't stop me. And then we're going to move on to questions, comments, and answers. As ever, this is being recorded, so please feel free to share it with friends and family just afterwards. Mike, the floor is very much yours. What are we learning from SCI 11?
Well, thank you very much, Michael, for your introduction. Just to say that the SCI fits into research that we've undertaken for some years on cities, centres where clusters of commercial and financial activity come together. We've been in this space for nearly 20 years, with the initial research for the Global Financial Centres Index taking place in 2005. And we're now into the 37th edition of the GFCI, while the SCI and the Global Green Finance Index are newer indices that focus on key areas of development. And the Smart Centres Index is designed in particularly to track commercial centres' ability to create, develop and deploy technology. And the aim is to help investors, government and regulators view the attractions of centres for new technologies and products by really trying to track how places around the world are doing in terms of their welcome of innovation and technology. It's a factor assessment index. This means it takes account of two different sets of data. First of all, instrumental factors. These are a large range of quantitative data which are drawn from a whole variety of data sources, including the World Bank and the OECD and others. And we could take that quantitative data and combine it with the results of a survey that we run continuously, asking people to assess centres for their strengths in technology and innovation. And we combine those two sets of data using advanced statistical modelling, an early form of AI, of course, and present the results that come out of that assessment. We're looking at three different dimensions when we look at the SCI. First of all, innovation support, which is the approach taken to regulation and support for the innovation and technology industry. Creative intensity, the extent to which technology and innovation are embedded in the economy of that centre. And delivery capability, which really reflects the quality of work being undertaken. And looking at the SCI world, we have 76 centres featuring an SCI 11. There are strong clusters in Western Europe, in North America, Asia Pacific, and in the Middle East. But we do have some others, and we're tracking now over 130 centres and expect to see more enter the index as time goes by. Who gets involved in the SCI in terms of the survey that I mentioned? We have respondents from a wide range of sectors. Just about a quarter come directly from people working in technology, around another quarter coming from professional services, and then others in other areas of knowledge, policy and public finance and finance. Across the world, most respondents, or the largest number of respondents, are from Asia Pacific, but with North America, Western Europe, and Middle East and Africa really well represented as well. So, the headlines. San Francisco and Zurich take first and second places in the index, overtaking London. London has been in the top spot for a few editions of the index, but just really showing the competition there is between centres in this area. And just taking a regional difference, 5 Western European centres feature in the top 10, alongside 3 US centres, with Singapore and Tel Aviv also featuring in the top 10. So really a big focus, I think, on North America and Western Europe as seen as the leading centres in this area. There's reasonable stability. Some 8 centres rose 10 or more places in the rankings, and 5 centres fell 10 or more places in the rankings, but actually that's a pretty stable set of results. And the average rating for centres in SCI 11 rose by 0.63%, following a fall of just over 1% at last edition. And interestingly, the biggest increase in average ratings was Latin America and the Caribbean, so seeing real strength in the small number of centres that are featured in the index from that part of the world. And really this shows that confidence in technology development and centres is quite stable, despite current geopolitical tensions and trade disruption, which is just an interesting point to note. And just looking at the assessments in the SCI survey, they do really appear to favour centres with very strong people skills, including the leading centres and Oxford and Cambridge, which form that golden triangle with London and the UK. So there's a real emphasis on people skills in this particular index, and I suspect Michael might comment further on that later in the session. So just taking a closer look at the results. As I mentioned, reasonable stability in the rankings. Just noting though that Luxembourg has performed very strongly in this edition. North America and Western European strongly represented, and Busan and Shenzhen perform well from Asia Pacific. Tel Aviv and Dubai take 8th and 11th place from the Middle East and Africa region, with Abu Dhabi also entering the top 20. So we're seeing perhaps a slight surge in terms of the UAE and their commitment and investment in technology. Looking at the leading centres in the index, the top 5 showing their ratings over time, there has been a dropping back over the last few editions of the index, but the slight uptick in this edition, as I mentioned, average ratings are up. And San Francisco sort of quite stormed ahead in this edition to take first place. And we also track the SCI results by dimension. So if you go to the full report, you'll find details of exactly how the dimensions stack up. They're reasonably well balanced in most of the leading centres, but some have a slight edge for innovation support or delivery capability. And in broad terms, in Western Europe and Latin America and the Caribbean, places score higher for creative intensity, while centres in North America score higher for innovation support. Centres in Asia Pacific perform well in delivery capability, so there are regional differences in the strengths of economies when it comes to innovation. Taking a quick look across the regional results, in Western Europe we have 9 centres in the top 20 in the world. Luxembourg and Brussels performed particularly strongly in this edition of the index. In North America, Seattle moved up 6 places, and San Francisco is the only other North American centre at the top of the table to improve its rank and rating. With, as I mentioned before, 3 North American centres in the top 20 and 5 in the top 10 and 5 in the top 20. Looking at Asia Pacific, generally centres in Asia Pacific fell in the rankings. There are 3 centres in the top 20 from Asia Pacific, but a slight falling back in the rank position among Asian centres. Busan and Shenzhen, along with Singapore, rank in the top 20. Looking at Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Tallinn takes the lead in the region, with Astana in 2nd place. Tallinn and Budapest both improved more than 10 ranked places, and so quite a balanced performance in that region. In the Middle East and Africa, we've already mentioned Tel Aviv, Dubai and Abu Dhabi, who feature in the top 20, but almost all centres improved in both the rankings and the ratings in this region. And we continue to watch Africa for technology development going forwards. In Latin America and the Caribbean, Bermuda consolidated its lead in the region, up 6 ranked places to 51st, and Cayman Islands improved 11 ranked places to take 2nd place for Mexico City. The increase in the average rating at 2.49% was the biggest improvement across the 6 regions that we track in the index. Just a brief word about the taxonomy we use for the SCI. We divide the quantitative factors into 6 areas: technology, financial, reputational, business environment, human capital, infrastructure. And to be good in the SEI terms as a centre which is focused on innovation and technology, you need to have strengths across many of those areas. But looking at the area of competitiveness sub-indices, this is where we track performance, taking account of the quantitative measures in each of those 6 areas, and we run the model separately for each of them. The leading centres have strengths across the board. We see San Francisco and London and New York and Singapore featuring, and Zurich featuring, highly ranked across many of these areas. While individual centres are stronger in particular areas, Singapore, for example, is very strong in the measures which are to do with reputation. New York is very strong in technology and financial sector development. Dubai in business environment and human capital, Busan in infrastructure. So this is where we start to see the differences that we between different centres in the strengths that they bring to the table. And just looking at the difference between the main index that are using all the quantitative factors and just the technology factors, we see that some centres, such as London, New York, perform better in the technology sub-index than in the overall index. They have a slight advantage because of their strengths in technology. Singapore, they're up 6 places on this measure compared with its placing in the overall index. So again, this is another way of cutting the data so we can see which centres have a real technological edge. Just a few further analyses from me. First of all, reputational advantage. We track the assessment in the rating in the SCI against the average weighted assessment in the SCI survey. And the reputational advantage is in effect the difference between the two. Having a high reputational advantage, which is a range of centres including Busan, Stockholm, London, New York, Luxembourg, this means that people probably out in the world have a better view of what's happening in the centre than the quantitative data alone would show. So people maybe are particularly good at marketing, or the reputation of the centre is particularly strong for some reason. At the other end of this table, we have the centres which have a high reputational disadvantage. These centres score lower in the SCI than we might expect based on the quantitative data alone. And these centres might need to do a better job of telling the world about their progress and how they're doing in technology and innovation, because we think that people's perception of them lags behind the reality that we see. I'm going to pass over to Michael now for his comments and observations. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Mike. And as ever, everything's online to read in detail. So this is just a quick taster. I might open with one observation in general terms, and that's actually to do with, for example, the position of London. London is intriguing because you can see that it has slipped 2 spots. But what is clear here is it's difficult to describe London, because were you to throw Oxford and Cambridge into that cluster, you might argue that London would rise quite significantly. And we see this in a variety of areas. This index, unlike some of our other indices, is less nationally biased and much more urban. So let's have a quick look at 6 items. The regional difference in assessments. We might say here that distance makes the heart grow fonder. What is intriguing, if you look at this somewhat complicated side, but it's worth getting into these charts in the main report. San Francisco is liked more than you might expect by Western Europe and Eastern Europe and Central Asia, and not so much by Asia Pacific, others in North America, or for example, those in Middle East and Africa. So the further away that people are, the more they seem to like San Francisco, and the exact same thing applies to New York, which is not so well liked by Western Europe and not so well liked by Middle East and Africa. So an interesting bit here, and shows that the differences in the assessments are not necessarily due to national characteristics. This next slide here runs a correlation between SCI 11 and the various instrumental factors. What I draw out of this, and I think it's important, is one, the broad base of things that you have to get right. You can see here a pretty strong set of, medium set of correlations across a whole variety of factors. Intriguingly, for me, the thing that's interesting is the World Digital Competitiveness Ranking, which will come up in just a second. as we look at the correlation just on technology sectors on this next slide. As Mike had produced the analysis just on technology, we've done the same thing on the correlations. On this one, you can see World Digital Competitiveness Ranking is absolutely key. Not surprising. I would argue that for over the last half century, 50% of innovation has been the use of computing. So digital competitiveness is absolutely core. But what you might then see is a rapid tailing off. And despite many of the announcements by governments, the Government AI Readiness Index at 0.293 there is the fifth one, isn't particularly important. And again, the use of technology in the smart city itself, just below that, the smart city index correlation 0.264 is quite weak, if not close to non-existent. So what we're seeing is that, again, there is a distinction between smart centers, which is what this index does, and smart cities, which is about the applications of technology in the management and running of a city. The following slide looks at where people believe technology is going. Okay, not surprisingly, given the furore over ChatGPT and everything, you can see that artificial intelligence, digital computing constitute 23% of what people see. But note that energy and environmental at 17% is storming along. And actually, there's a pretty good spread here of technologies that people expect will have the most impact on industry over the next 5 years. So whilst it is AI heavy at the moment, it is not just AI. The following slide is one that's often not taken. People often look at patent applications, but of course we look at it per million people. And you can see here two clearly differentiated strategies. One is a lot of patent applications, and the other is not really caring much about it. Japan clearly was looking at it, that's the purple slide, and then it's kind of tailed off, while South Korea has continued to rise. Remember from Mike's presentation of the reputational index that Busan had a very high advantage and Seoul had an almost equally a reputational disadvantage. Seoul really needing to do a lot of work on marketing, and Busan clearly doing very well on its marketing, but it is, to be fair, a slightly smaller city. So it's an interesting one where Korea, I think, could do a lot. And this index shows, of course, the strength of Korea in patent applications. The yellow line is China, which is following a similar strategy. So we basically have South Korea and China pursuing patent applications in ways that the other centers are not, and particular declines in interest in patents in Europe. If we move to the sixth slide here, this is a very, very interesting subject at the moment. We're expecting a lot more volatility. The index uses a variety of university rankings. Most of these university rankings have been created in the West, typically in the Anglosphere, so they tend to be US or UK ratings. These ratings are biased towards combined research institutions with educational institutions and tend not to look very much at the student satisfaction. So when we look at leading universities, not surprisingly, the US and the UK score quite highly. However, as has been noted, over time, the China has done well and been moving up in those rankings over the last 30 years. But note that Switzerland and Singapore, two small countries with, I think from memory, 10 million people in Switzerland and 6-7 million in Singapore, you can see here that they're doing quite well and better to some degree than Germany and the Netherlands. So why do we think this might change? Well, you'll have clearly seen that the US administration has been picking fights with its major universities, and there is talk of a brain drain from America, which ought to shake this up. The second thing, of course, is that the indices that are coming out now are are trying to correct that weighting towards the US and UK, and so we would expect to see some shifts in what are considered to be the leading universities in a variety of different subjects. So there's a lot to go for here. We're pleased with Smart Centers Index 11. We think that it's starting to bed down, but we could always use your help. And in particular, please ask people you believe are qualified to evaluate this to have a good look at filling in the index for the next quarter. Mike, that concludes sort of my remarks. Um, Mike, we've got a question here, and folks, please feel free to type in your questions to the question and answer button there. We've got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions. Hugh Purser asks, has there been a significant shift in contributors to the index over time, either by region or sector? For example, high participation from Asia, relatively low from the USA. How does that affect, or does it create bias, and how does it affect your results, Mike?
Sure. Thanks. It's a really good question, and the answer on sector shift is there's been pretty consistent numbers. So I mentioned sort of a quarter coming directly from the technology sector, a quarter or so coming from people working in professional services, with the others, distributed, and that's been reasonably consistent over the time we've been running the index. There has been a shift in some of the regional participation in the survey. When we started, the largest number of responses we got was from Western Europe. We're a Western European-based firm, and maybe that is where our initial communications reached. But we have seen over time, particularly the Middle East and Africa and Asia Pacific, the number of respondents growing over time. You're right that there's relatively low participation from the US and North America more generally. And I'm not sure that this creates bias. I think it is more likely to reflect the views, obviously, of people working in those regions. It's not so much bias. I think it's a reflection of where people are really interested in what's happening globally in the development of innovation and technology. One of the things we do in the index methodology is that we, if you rate your own home centre in our survey, we ignore that response on the grounds that you will have a home sector bias of some kind, either positive or negative. So we do try to avoid bias in that way. Ideally, we probably want a few more responses from North America. If you know people working in the technology field in the US who you think would be interested in participating, we'd be delighted for you to share information with them. Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Mike. Got another question here from Frank Domini. Frank has a great interest in Africa and the Maghreb. Mike, given the demographic projections for Africa, how do we improve the ratings for African cities and centers?
Yeah, I think that the issue in Africa is one I've had quite a few discussions with people with interests in Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, recently. And I think the issue here is about building capacity for human resource development. Having a very large number of young people in the population is well and good, but if you can train them in engineering and technology subjects, then that's going to be probably the answer for African centres to be able to make more of an impact. So I really think it is about capacity building, and just how you do that and how you build the funds to do that is a question which is top of many policymakers' minds in African countries and people interested in Africa. But maybe, Frank, we should have a chat about that at some point.
Well, it is interesting, Mike, isn't it? If you go back 40 years, none of the Asian centers, well, virtually none, would have appeared as high as they do on this chart. So it can be done, and I would argue, particularly from experiences of China, Singapore, and Korea, a lot of that is due to the quality of the universities pulling things through. So it is really to be core on that. In fact, some of the fading of the main European centers is due to the university systems falling slightly behind in certain countries. So interesting there. There does seem to be a lot of university leading in this space, although as we've seen, there's a number of other correlations that matter. Well, Mike, we seem to have all the questions there. I mean, really, for me, if I might ask a question of you, um, what are you planning in terms of further developments in the index itself?
Well, I think one of the things we're interested in is looking at clusters. You mentioned earlier the sort of the London, London, Cambridge, Oxford. There are other clusters such as the Greater Bay Area in South China, Silicon Valley. There's various places where there's an awful lot of technological activity, and the clusters around Boston as well. And what we're not quite sure about yet is how to capture data which will enable us to look at those clusters. But it's something we'd be very interested in trying to look at, because increasingly in this field it seems that there is a set of linked cities that seem to work together and divide up technology between them, and we need to be thinking about how we can capture some of that. And I think beyond that, it is continuing to spread the word and to get as high a level of involvement in the index survey that we can.
And if somebody wanted to know more for a center, particularly somebody who's actually doing work on developmental policy in this space, what what other questions can you answer with a deeper dive into their data?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, we can track some of the strengths of particular centres in terms of the various areas of competitiveness we use in the centre. We can certainly dig into which parts of the world seem to have a better or worse perception of an individual centre or an economy, to give people an idea of where their connectivity lies and where their marketing effort might need to be placed. But really, it's about saying, against those centres in your region, where are you scoring really well on business environment or on infrastructure or human capital development? Where do you need to do the work to develop that part of your innovation ecosystem? So it's those kind of questions that we often get asked, actually, by various places across the world.
Great. We've got another question here from Sungu An. Congratulations. Thank you, Sungun. A question on the influence of stable coins and digital assets. Do they also play an important role in the development of financial centers?
That's a really interesting question, and thanks, Sungu. At the moment, there is I've got no evidence to demonstrate that there's a real influence of stablecoins and digital assets on the SCI results. We do track a number of technology factors which look at digitalization and digital assets and the use of crypto and stablecoin currencies, and they don't seem to correlate highly with the Smart Centers Index. So at the moment, they don't look as if they are highly correlated. In the terms of the development of financial centers, I think the whole question of digital assets is likely to be important. In other words, how financial centers deal with the regulation and management of the digitalization and tokenization of assets, I think is very important. And we did some work with Hong Kong last year on this, and there's a report up on the website. But I think that's more likely to be the area that has an impact rather than particularly stable coins and in themselves.
Hmm. Now, we had a question here as well from Sandy Begbie on how important is the existence of a dynamic fintech cluster in this survey. That's one I can answer. Uh, yes, in doing the correlation on the technology factors, Sandy, it was actually quite high. It was the second most important at 0.408 against 0.506 for the World Digital Competitiveness Ranking. We find that interesting. That's just, as I say, though, on the technology factors. When you look at all the factors, that slides down to the ninth one rather than the second one. But it is clear that people like to make money out of technology, and in fact, some Goose question equally, I think, indicates that. Now, just two quick ones to finish, Mike. Hugh Purser says that clusters are a good line of inquiry. Foreigners tend to look more at clusters than do residents, e.g., London, Oxford, Cambridge are viewed competitively in the domestic environment, but are seen as one from the perspective of many overseas observers. Although I point out, as I indicated in my first slide, not necessarily at a national level. Um, Mike, anything you want to add to that?
No, I don't think so. Other than it's going to be quite a challenge, I think, to get data at that cluster level. But I think increasingly that's how innovation and technology in particular is working. I was speaking to people from the Greater Bay Area just on Tuesday, and just saying how Guangzhou, Macau, Hong Kong, Shenzhen are working together to work out how to best use their strengths to develop the economy of the Greater Bay Area together. And so increasingly, that's the way things are being done.
And Frank Domine again, how will a Pan-African secure quantum internet impact the regional rating, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell. I mean, I think the issue here is when that starts to have real world effects that show up in the data. That's when it will shift things. And I'd go back, I think, to saying that human capital development in Africa is likely to be the thing which allows the use of such technology to be brought into real world applications and development, and that's when we'll see things really shifting.
Although I might argue it's certainly going to help Africa's reputation, if nothing else. It's neat to see that kind of leadership. Right. Well, folks, one thing we might also point out, the index is available to sponsor. You can have your logo there in the top right if you wish. But Mike, do you want to just take us through close?
Sure, yes. Just to say, the link to the Smart Centres Index survey is here. If you have any further queries, then our contact details are around. You can find us to get in touch. Finally, just say we've got other events coming up next week towards a more sustainable future for civil society organisations. And for those of you with a particular focus on employee share plans, the ESOP Symposium 2025 also next week. On the 1st of July, we have the FS Club Summer Mixer. Can AI survive regulation? And we hope that'll be both a fun evening, but also one that has some challenging thinking as well. So very much looking forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you for your time today, and we look forward to the continuing development of technology and innovation across the world. Thank you very much.
Take care.